and welcome to my channel. My fascination with cryptids began a few years ago when I was on vacation listening to my cousin tell stories about Bigfoot and Dogman. I started listening to and reading every story I could find about every type of cryptid. This led to me starting this channel so I could read these stories I find so fascinating. In this episode, I'm going to do something a little different. All three encounters come from the same person and are broken up into three parts, one for each post. The first encounter he had with this unknown humanoid creature that sounds a lot like a crawler was while he was walking alone in the woods. Unable to put the first encounter behind him, he gathered some friends and went back into those same woods only to have a second encounter with this cryptid. He then has a small update giving a very brief, vague account of the third and final encounter and how he is doing in the aftermath. I'm finding more and more that the crawler stories I come across are some of the creepiest cryptid stories. This one is no different. So stick around for the full story because this isn't one you'll want to miss. If you are a hardcore believer, a skeptic with an open mind, or a non-believer, you are welcome here. I just ask that you keep it respectful in the comment section. No one should be ridiculed whether they believe or not. Alright, now let's get to today's stories. Our OP lives in South Carolina, south of Charleston. Established in 1670 as Charlestown, Charleston became the first comprehensively planned town in the 13 original colonies. The city has a rich history and is no stranger to paranormal activity. It is considered the most haunted city in South Carolina, so it makes sense that cryptids would also be encountered in the surrounding areas. The OP was left absolutely terrified by his encounter and turned to the internet to unburden himself and to seek help. He describes himself as a science-based person who always seeks out logical explanations for the things that happen around him. He desperately wanted to believe that there was a logical explanation for what he saw in those woods, but sometimes there just isn't a logical way to explain some of the things that happen in this world. Before the pandemic, he used to go on evening walks as a form of leisurely activity and to decompress from his stressful days at work. But due to the pandemic, he was forced to take some bad shifts at work and was unable to continue his evening routine. That is, until he decided he would try to work in a walk late one night. So he put on his headband flashlight and ventured down a familiar trail that starts near his neighborhood and extends about 4 miles into the woods. His plan this evening was to walk 1.5 miles down this trail, turn around on a neighboring trail that ran parallel to this one, and walk home for a total of 3 miles. Everything was normal for the first mile and just a little beyond that, but then our OP got the distinct feeling that he was being watched. He had been hearing footsteps in the leaves off the trail for almost 5 minutes and thought that he was being followed. When that uncomfortable feeling of being watched came over him, he stopped, turned off his headlamp, and just listened. But he didn't hear anything. He stood there in silence, trying to rationalize the noise as an animal or somebody up to no good. He decided then that it was time to head home, so he turned his light back on and started his trek back the way he had come. Not 2 minutes later, he heard the footsteps again, but this time they sounded different. Whatever was following him was now walking on 4 feet instead of 2 as he had previously heard, and it had quickened its pace too, matching his. He spun around, his headlamp still on and the light on his phone aimed down the path behind him. Nothing. He grew angry and yelled out, "Leave me alone. I'm going to call the cops, and if you come at me, I have a knife." Again, nothing. "Get the F out of here," he yelled as he started toward where the footsteps had come from. That's when he saw it. What looked to be a naked man about 20 yards down the path running at full speed on all fours into the woods. His initial thought was a person on drugs, but the area where he lives doesn't have any drug problems. But he quickly discredited this thing as a person because of what it looked like. It was almost completely hairless, had a bald head, pale white skin, and looked way too natural running on all fours. When it ran, its back was flat and it was fast. Its bone structure suggested that this creature was designed to run on all fours. What happened next, according to the OP, was straight out of a horror movie. He continued down the path, all the while looking over his shoulder, not hearing anything. He was almost home free when he heard something charging through the leaves in the woods. He whipped around, and as soon as he did, the noise ceased. Then he saw the slow movement of a head emerging from behind a tree. He screamed at the creature in an attempt to intimidate it, but failed. And what he heard next, he says he will never forget. This thing cackled at him, the tone of which was pure mockery. He had only ever heard a cackling like that in nature documentaries and describes it as sounding like a monkey. He felt like prey being toyed with by its predator. He wasn't going to stick around a second longer and took off running, sprinting all the way home. Being a logical person, he tried to find a rational explanation for what he encountered, but dismissed the thoughts of this incident just being a prank or a rabid diseased coyote. He got a good look at his stalker and it was humanoid. Human feet, hands, head, even buttocks. But that's where its similarities to a human end. He called the police when he got home but did not tell them exactly what he saw for fear that they would think he was crazy. They scoured the area he encountered the creature but found nothing. They did notice that the leaves had been disrupted and followed 50 feet into the woods but lost the trail when it ended in a large grassy area. They found no footprints in the area. This is where his first encounter ends, but he needed answers, and he resolved to go back into those woods. After his first encounter, our OP was clearly distraught and disturbed by his frightening ordeal and just couldn't let it go. After cycling through all possible rational explanations to explain what he saw, he came to the conclusion that it couldn't have been a prank, a drugged out or mentally ill person, or a sick, deformed animal. He was a heavy skeptic at the time, and although his skepticism of all things paranormal persisted, he was warming to the idea that crawlers may actually exist. His encounter continued to nag him. He couldn't let it go. He needed to know what he saw that night, so he decided to go back into the woods. However, this time, he would be prepared and he would bring backup. He contacted 3 friends and described in full detail everything that happened that night. He told them of his intention to go back out there and asked if they would accompany him. Even though they, like him, were non-believers, they all had an adventurous side and loved spooky stuff, so they all agreed without hesitation. One friend brought a pistol, one a shotgun, and the OP also had a pistol. The third friend would carry 2 flashlights. One of the 2 flashlights would be his phone so he could have his camera ready to take pictures. They got together and waited until it was completely dark, setting off into the woods at around 9:30 p.m., going down the same trail. Fear and adrenaline were coursing through our OP, causing his heart to pound as they entered the woods. He felt more confident this time though, armed and with his friends. They were joking around with him at first and he tried to return their jests, but knowing he might once again see this thing that had stalked and terrified him made him nervous. They went the entire 1.5 miles down the trail he had planned on walking during his first trip, but saw and heard nothing. The preparation for this excursion and the anticipation of facing this thing kept them from giving up so easily, so they kept going. They walked about 5 to 8 more minutes and were approaching the 2-mile mark when they began hearing noises. The noises came from way back in the woods, not close, but loud enough that they took notice. The OP told his friend holding the flashlights to turn them off. He did, and they listened. They heard footsteps, and they were coming closer. Something bipedal was making its way toward them. The footsteps were heavy and they were loud. The OP called out when whatever it was coming their way was no more than 20 to 30 yards away. Is someone there? The footsteps halted, but only momentarily. When they started again, all 4 men could tell it was something on all 4s and it was heading straight for them. His friend turned the flashlights back on, but the woods were too dense to see anything. The trees close to the trail were sparse, but the foliage quickly grew dense the farther into the woods that you went. When the lights came back on, the sprinting footfalls stopped. Everyone stood in complete silence. The OP points out that whether or not you believe in the paranormal, hearing what they just heard would instill fear in anyone. His friend unholstered his pistol and kept it at the ready. Their eyes met and he could tell that his friend was no longer having a good time. The friend holding the camera was visibly shaking, his eyes darting from friend to friend. The third friend yelled, "I see you, come out. Stop effing with us. We have guns and we'll shoot. I don't want to hurt you over some dumb joke. Come on now." The only response was that horrible cackle. But this time it was more of a shriek and the creature sounded agitated. There was absolutely nothing the OP could compare to that terrible noise, as it sent a chill down his spine. His friend, who was standing right next to him, fired his shotgun into the woods, causing the OP's ears to ring. He could no longer hear anything, but followed his friend's eyes as they began tracking something running from left to right. He caught a glimpse of the same tall humanoid creature he had seen before, running on all fours before disappearing behind a tree. The friend who fired at the being took a step in that direction but was stopped by the one holding the flashlight, who told his friend that he fired buckshot and that there was no way he did not hit that thing. Adding evidence to this claim were the bullet holes filling the tree this thing darted behind. If the tree was hit by that many bullets, there's no way the creature didn't get hit. Or so they thought. The friend holding the shotgun then asked, "What if I hit it but it didn't hurt it?" They were all taken aback by the question. What if that was true? If he did in fact hit this thing, why hadn't it fallen over? The OP estimated that the being was anywhere from 6 feet to 6 feet 4 and somewhere in the neighborhood of 145 to 165 pounds. If it was still on its feet after getting shot, it wasn't something they wanted to be messing with. Then, that same mocking cackle he heard during his first encounter broke the silence. It no longer sounded agitated, but like it was enjoying itself and the fear it instilled in the four men. His friend fired in the direction of the cackle and he caught a glimpse of something running deeper into the woods, only for a second or two before it disappeared from the light. It was running way faster than what was possible for a human to be running on 4 legs. With the encounter over and the creature gone, they jogged the 2 miles back to the OP's house where they discussed the night's events. Everyone saw the same thing. All 3 of his friends were now believers, none of them discrediting his story. Their conversation quickly turned to what this thing could have been, and after reading some comments on the original post and doing some research, they all concluded that it was a crawler. They are all still skeptics when it comes to cryptids and the paranormal, but this event went a long way to making them true believers. But they all knew one thing for sure. They were going to go back out there, and next time they would be even more prepared, equipped with recording devices and better able to remain calm should they encounter this thing again. The third and final post of this harrowing tale isn't very long and is more of an update that gives a brief overview of what happened and how the OP is doing in the aftermath of his 3 encounters. He does apologize for not detailing the encounter in full, but was left too traumatized to be able to revisit the events at that time. He and his friends did go back out into those woods in search of the crawler, but the encounter did not go as they expected. They prepared for this third encounter by packing stronger flashlights, 2-way radios, a better camera, knives, a bat, and the same firearms that they brought during the second encounter. They even recruited a new team member who would stay behind in the OP's home in the event of an emergency. They were confident, perhaps too confident, and it led to them playing a game for which they were ill-equipped. The vague details given by the OP indicate a grisly encounter. They found the crawler again, but this time it got up close and personal with them. The best way to describe what he says next is to say it in his own words. The things that happened while in its presence have haunted my nightmares and plagued my mind during the days. One of his friends was badly hurt, to the extent that his injuries required medical attention. They weren't life-threatening, but the OP does say that he didn't look good after what took place. He did make a full recovery physically. Mentally, however, he is worse off than the OP. Like so many stories I've heard and so many people before him after having an encounter with these cryptids, the OP is experiencing PTSD and has begun therapy to try and deal with what happened during that third encounter. And understandably so, he went through a horrific ordeal. One commenter mentioned the change in him from one post to the next. I too noticed this as I was reading the story. There is a drastic change in tone and the way he writes from the first post to this last one. He never did make another post detailing in full what happened during that third and final encounter, but has let everyone know since then that he is doing much better. I will be keeping an eye on this one, and if there is another post, I'll be sure to share it. But if it never comes, I don't think anyone can blame him for not wanting to relive that horrific night. And that's going to do it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed these stories. If you'd like to hear more stories like these and other types of cryptids, make sure to subscribe to the channel. If you want to send me your story, I'd love to read it. My email is wolfwhocriedcryptid@gmail.com. I will also put my email in the description below. With your permission, I may want to use it in an upcoming episode. Please just make sure that it is well written, uses punctuation, and is proofread. Thank you for listening. I will catch you at the next episode.